Anime Autopsy here, and I need to have a conversation with you about something way stupider than power scaling and way more fundamental than foreshadowing. We need to talk about where One Piece actually takes place, because I am genuinely convinced that most of us are just making it up. You watch pirates, you see islands, you see a big round globe in a cover story, and your brain goes, "Oh cool, fantasy Earth." And listen to me, nobody ever proved that. What we did as a community is quietly shake hands on a headcanon and then start building a cathedral on top of it. You've seen these posts. Someone pulls up a real-world Earth map, slaps the red line over Eurasia and Africa, stretches the grand line around the equator, and proudly announces, "See, Oda just did a supercontinent." Then there's a 100-comment thread treating Oda's world building as if he just failed geography class instead of being an intentional, detail-obsessed author who has planned every major mystery for decades. Here's the thing. When you have a planet where the oceans form a perfect cross that wraps the entire globe, where there is a single continuous land wall that bisects the world vertically, and where the calmest waters on Earth are somehow the most lethal category of sea travel, the problem is not that the map is wrong. The problem is that the map is telling you in big neon letters, "I am not a normal planet." The red line and grand line function more like a containment grid than natural geology. And we keep bending over backwards to jam that into Plate Tectonics 101. And this is not a sin. This is normal. I say this as someone who has spent an actually embarrassing amount of adult life staring at Oda's globes, maps and cover stories, zooming in on low-res SBS scans, tracing coastlines, rotating them, flipping them, trying to get them to line up with Pangea. I have had evenings where I am hunched over my monitor, squinting at the red line, whispering, maybe if Wano is Japan and Reverse Mountain is Gibraltar, I have turned into a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast, except the toast is Reverse Mountain and the Jesus is Oda used Google Earth. But every time you zoom out, the world keeps screaming at you. Sky islands with their own seas, a moon covered in ancient automata, and murals of winged people migrating to a blue planet. Terms like blue sea and fairy verth tossed around as if someone somewhere has a cosmic map we haven't seen yet. At a certain point, you have to stop asking, "Where on earth is this?" and start asking a much worse question. What if the biggest secret in One Piece is not under the sea, or at the bottom of the Grand Line, or waiting for you on Laugh Tale? What if the real reveal is above the sky? What if this story is not on Earth at all? So here's what I'm actually arguing, so you can decide right now if you want to waste 2 hours of your finite human lifespan on this with me. The thesis is simple to say and very annoying to prove. One Piece does not take place on our Earth. Not a future Earth, not a flooded Earth, not Earth but wacky. The text, the maps, and those cursed Enel cover stories all point to a constructed or non-Earth planet with a hidden spacefaring past. Not metaphorically, not spiritually, I mean in the boring geological, this rock is wrong sense. Now, I am aware this video is long. You saw the timestamp. You probably sighed. This is normal, but listen to me. If I just popped in and said, Oda's doing a secret space opera, trust me, bro, you should close the tab. The only way to separate pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast from this author intentionally built something wild is to go through the receipts slowly, tediously, to the point where you start questioning your own life choices. Because here's the thing, if we misidentify the setting, we misread everything that matters. If you assume this is Earth with extra seasoning, then the red line is just fantasy geology, the grand line is quirky currents, and the calm belt is haha sea kings. But if this planet is constructed, that perfect cross of red line and grand line becomes planetary engineering, a containment grid someone planned. And suddenly the Void Sentry, the ancient weapons, and Enel's trip to Fairy Earth are not random world building. They're evidence. We need to talk stakes. Get the setting wrong, and the Void Sentry is just a forbidden war instead of a civilization that might not be native to this globe. Ancient weapons become super weapons instead of tools built for a different scale of conflict. intercontinental, maybe interplanetary. Enel's moon adventure is a gag side story, instead of the author quietly screaming, "Hey, there were robots on the moon and murals of winged people leaving for a blue planet. Are you awake?" And when we finally reach Laugh Tale, if you're still in This Is Earth mode, you will miss half the emotional weight of what that reveal is actually telling you about the world. So here's the plan. First, I'm going to break the geography. Red line, grand line, calm belt, the global map, what they imply if you stop treating them as decorative. Then we go up. Sky Islands, the moon, Enel's cover story, all the blue sea and blue planet language that only makes sense if someone is viewing this place from outside. After that, down into history. The Void Century tech Vegapunk hints at the ancient kingdom, the poneglyph network, as an information system built for a planet that was already a problem. Then we get into blood. Will of D, the weirdly persistent bloodlines, the sun god Nika and Joy Boy as potential off-world or at least off-era figures, and how that reframes the inherited will thing as more than just family drama. Finally, we'll pull it together at Laugh Tale and the Final War, and I'll show you how, once you see the space opera skeleton under the pirate skin, it becomes very hard to go back to the comfy Earth assumption without actively ignoring chunks of canon I need you to understand. The goal here is not, wow, space theory is cool. The goal is that by the end, if you still want One Piece to be on Earth, you're going to have homework. You're going to have to explain away the cross-shaped planet, the moon robots, the off-world murals, the terminology, the tech, all of it. And if you can't, then maybe, just maybe, Oda has been writing hard sci-fi foreshadowing under a goofy pirate hat for 20 plus years. Which means we start where every good space argument starts, with a map that should not exist. So here's how we're going to do this without turning into that pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast every time Oda draws a circle. We're treating this as a court case. I'm not here to vibe about space pirates. I'm here to prosecute the charge. This world is not Earth. Geography is our physical evidence. The red line, the grand line, the calm belt, the cross-shaped planet shot Oda keeps drawing. That's crime scene photos. Cover stories? That's surveillance footage. Enel on the moon, the Automata, the murals of winged people flying to a blue planet. In-story terminology is witness testimony. People saying blue sea, blue planet, fairy verth, as if they're talking from an orbital perspective. An author comments, SBS answers, Vegapunk lore dumps, partial confessions from the guy who built the crime scene. Now, I need you to understand the category we're in. There's fun headcanon, and then there's what we're doing here. Headcanon is, wouldn't it be cool if One Piece was secretly a space opera? This is fine, this is normal. You can do that with any story, but that's not evidence, that's fan fiction. What we're checking is whether the manga keeps behaving as if it's a space story that forgot to tell you it's in space. Does the geography behave like natural geology or planned engineering? Do the races behave like fantasy species or colonist populations? Does the tech behave like quirky steampunk or fallen sci-fi? That difference matters, because any single example can be dismissed. Enel finding moon robots, that could be a gag. Winged people on murals leaving the moon, be visual. The red line being a continuous war around the globe. Oda being dramatic. This is not a sin. Authors exaggerate. But here's the thing. When geography, races, tech, and history all tilt in the same direction, you don't have a gag anymore, you have a pattern. When Vegapunk talks about a lost advanced civilization, and that tech matches what Enel finds on the moon, and that matches the Sky People's origin story, and that matches the way the planet is literally divided into quadrants, the probability of coincidence starts free-falling. I'm in a bad philosophic. So structurally, we're running this argument in 3 acts. Act 1, the planet is wrong. We're going to pull apart the red line, grand line, calm belt system and ask whether any geologist would sign off on this without also asking who built the containment grid. Act 2, the sky is lying. Sky PA, Fairy Verth, Enel's cover story, the moon murals, the term blue planet. We're going to treat those as testimony from people who remember a bigger map. Act 3, history is bigger than the sea. Void Century, Ancient Kingdom, Will of D, Joy Boy Nicker, The Promised Final War. All of that starts to read very differently if the real border isn't the calm belt, it's low orbit. And while we go through this, I need you to keep a mental scoreboard. Every time something feels grounded in a weird version of Earth, put a tally in the Earth column. Every time something feels engineered, constructed, or off-world, put a tally in the space column. Don't hand me your verdict yet, just keep score. By the time we're done with the map in Act 1, if your space column isn't at least sweating, I'll shut up and go back to arguing about foreshadowing with the community, which means we need to start with the most incriminating piece of physical evidence Oda keeps waving in our face, a planet crossed by two perfect scars. But let's actually read the crime scene. Oda doesn't draw us a vague fantasy blob of land masses. He gives us a planet with a single continuous wall continent, the red line, wrapping the globe vertically. Then he has a single continuous ocean current, the Grand Line, wrapping it horizontally. They intersect at right angles and carve the world into 4 perfect ocean quadrants. That's not fun pirate map energy. That's a geometric diagram. Here's the thing. On an Earth-type planet, this is nonsense. Continents move. Plates collide. Subduct, fracture, and yeet mountain ranges all over the place over hundreds of millions of years. You do not get one unbroken, uniform, skyscraper-tall cliff that politely maintains its structural integrity around the entire planet. That's not plate tectonics. That's a ring road. Same with the Grand Line. Ocean currents on Earth form gyres, loops, chaotic swirls driven by rotation, temperature gradients, and coastlines. You get the Gulf Stream, the Kuroshio, the Antarctic circumpolar current, all messy, all interacting. You do not get a single razor-thin supernatural conveyor belt that just keeps going around the equator with clockwork intent. That's not meteorology. That's plumbing. And then Oda doubles down with the calm belt. On both sides of the Grand Line, you have mirror strips of ocean, with no wind, no currents, and an overpopulation of sea kings. Functionally, it's a moat. It's a no-sail zone that makes casual crossing into or out of the Grand Line almost impossible unless you have sea stone, a warship, or an actual death wish. So the red line walls you vertically, the Grand Line slices you horizontally, and the calm belt electrifies the fence. This is where I need you to stop doing the, well, it's just fantasy, this is fine, shrug. Because Oda is obsessively consistent about the consequences. Trade routes, political power, marine logistics, even the simple fact that the East, West, North and South blues barely interact, all of that flows from this map. The entire story's social and political storytelling is downstream of a planet that has been chopped into 4 isolated aquariums. At some point, we need to admit this doesn't behave like random fantasy geography. It behaves like infrastructure. The red line functions as a hard barrier. The Grand Line and calm belt system function as a controlled circulation and isolation mechanism. If I showed you this layout with no one-piece labels, you wouldn't say continent. You'd say containment grid, or prison design, or someone really wanted to keep the fish from talking to each other. And this is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is extremely intentional world building from an author who, we know, plans absurdly far ahead. The problem is what category you put it in. If you keep insisting this is just a quirky Earth reskin, you have to ignore how engineered it feels. So if the basic layout of the planet behaves more like planned infrastructure than natural geology, who built it? And more importantly, what were they so afraid of that they needed to cage the seas themselves? Hold that thought, because the next piece of evidence doesn't just stay on the map, it goes off-world. So when someone hears off-world and immediately fires back with, relax, it's a shonen manga, of course the map is weird, stop overthinking it, I get it, I do. That reaction is normal. That instinct to swat away pattern-seeking monkey theories before we start seeing Jesus in the reverse mountain fog, this is fine. But here's the thing, That response only works if the author treats geography as wallpaper. Oda doesn't. Oda keeps walking back on screen, tapping the wallpaper and going, "Hey, you paying attention to this? We need to stop pretending the map is just vibes when the story keeps treating it as machinery." Think about how often One Piece drags you back to a global perspective. We get full world maps in the manga. We get the red line and grand line drawn as a perfect cross around the planet, not once as a cool poster, but repeatedly as a problem the characters must route around. We get reverse mountain explained, diagrammed, and physically navigated. We get calm belt rules that govern where sea kings spawn, how ships can move, and why the Marines need sea stone. That's not throwaway background. That's a mechanical system the plot keeps slamming into. Compare that to most fantasy worlds where geography is just, over there is desert, over there is ice, don't worry about the tectonics, champ. Those maps are mood boards. Their rivers run uphill, their mountain ranges make no geological sense, and the narrative never cares. This is not a sin. This is normal. Because in those stories, geography is a painted backdrop. The author never asks you to solve it. In One Piece, navigation is the dungeon. The sea currents, the log poses, the magnetic fields, the fact you literally need specialized compasses that remember islands because the planet refuses to obey a standard pole. That's a game system. That's a rule set. The Grand Line isn't just where strong guys live. It's a gated progression path, enforced by planetary design. And once you frame it that way, the "it's just fantasy" defense starts to fall apart. If the geography is a system the characters have to hack, survive, and eventually transcend, then its design is a narrative statement. It's foreshadowing in cartographic form. The red line choking the seas, the calm belt acting as a living minefield, reverse mountain as a one-way funnel into the story's true arena. Those aren't lazy scribbles. Those are constraints an intentional author built, so the endgame reveal has weight. Pattern interrupt. Imagine if, in the final saga, Oda said, "Yeah, I just thought the cross looked cool." Do you honestly buy that from the same writer who coordinated Laboon and Brook across 50 in-universe years? I need you to really sit with the difference here. A random cool map doesn't need an in-universe explanation. A recurring, rule-bound, plot-driving planetary cage does. When Oda has characters study it, exploit it, and dream of sailing beyond it, the red line/grand line calm belt configuration stops being aesthetic and becomes evidence. Evidence that demands a cause, a builder, a purpose. Oh no, we don't get to shrug and walk away. If we take Oda's consistency seriously, we have to treat that cross-shaped prison as deliberate world building pointing to an answer. Which means the real question isn't why is the map weird, it's who designed this planet, and what happens when someone finally breaks their design. So if that cross-shaped world is evidence, we need to read it the way you'd read a prison blueprint, not a tourist map. Start simple. You've got the 4 blues, east, west, north, south. On paper that sounds cozy, almost RPG starter zone energy, but then the red line drops straight through the globe and the grand line wraps around it, and suddenly those 4 blues aren't neighbours anymore, they're 4 isolated ocean quadrants. You are not sailing from East Blue to North Blue on a weekend trip. You are boxed in. Hard. And the only ways through that box? They're not casual shortcuts. They're choke points. Reverse mountain at one intersection, Mariajois sitting smugly on top of the world, and Fishman Island buried underneath. 3 doors, all trapped, all lethal, all surveilled. That's not organic geography. That's level design. Here's the thing. Reverse mountain is one of the dumbest pieces of geology I've ever seen. And I say that with love. 4 seas flow uphill, meet at a peak, then funnel you down into the Grand Line. This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is in fact how you design a security funnel in a game. You force every ship that wants into the central route through one insane, high failure, high body count ramp. No alternative entrances, no side doors, no casual migration. Then you wrap that central route in the calm belt. No wind, no currents, sea kings for days. On a natural Earth, a belt of death perfectly hugging your most important ocean highway is a geological miracle. On a constructed planet, it's a moat. It's barbed wire on water. It doesn't stop everyone, but it stops enough that only people with intentional tech, intentional knowledge, or intentional help can cross. And who controls the help? The world government parked at the literal crossroads. Marijouet on the red line, Cypher Pool in the shadows, Marines patrolling the Grand Line. When movement is forced through a few bottlenecks, whoever owns those bottlenecks owns trade, owns information, owns who even knows other seas exist. The community inside each blue can be curated. Stories can be contained. Rebellions can be local instead of global. From a storytelling perspective, that is an author screaming, "This world is built to be governable from the center." I need you to see the categories shift here. This isn't just the map is weird. This is a surface arranged so populations can be separated, stressed, and studied. It reads less Earth and more containment grid, more lab maze, more what happens if we drop different cultures in 4 petri dishes and keep them mostly apart for a few hundred years. And if the planet's surface is a prison, the obvious question is, prison built by who? Because when we stop staring at the water and start looking up at sky islands, at people calling this place the blue planet, at Enel casually commuting to the moon, that's when the foreshadowing stops feeling nautical and starts feeling orbital. Listen to me, once we go off the map and into the sky, the whole series starts whispering that the warden might not be human and the key to the cell might not be on the sea at all. So when Skypiea shows up, that's not just a fun detour where Oda yeets the Straw Hats into the clouds for a beach episode with God. That's the moment the story physically grabs the camera, tilts it 90 degrees and says, "Stop thinking sail west, start thinking ascend." The knock-up stream is literally a vertical Grand Line. It's a launch pad disguised as bad weather. Here's the thing. Up to that point, the adventure is mapped horizontally. Reverse Mountain, Lodetown, Alabasta. You're tracing a weird globe, sure, but it's still a globe in the pirate map on a tavern wall sense. And suddenly the ship is fired into the sky. The log pose points not ahead, but above. And the story tells you, in universe, that the next island is at 10,000 meters. That is an axis shift. That is foreshadowing through geography. And pay attention to how the community inside the story reacts. Blue Sea people treat sky islands as drunk sailor creepypasta. Islands in the sky, sure, and my grandma's a Yonko. It's myth, rumour, a category error. But when you finally get up there, the sky people are not confused at all. They have taxonomy, Blue Sea, White Sea, White Sea. They have official names for the world you thought was the only world. That asymmetry is the author tapping you on the shoulder. From the Skypian perspective, the ocean we've been obsessing over is just one layer in a stacked system. They talk about blue sea dwellers, the way you might talk about surface folk in a sci-fi setting. And once Enel starts ranting about fairy Earth and a blue planet, it gets worse. Because that phrasing only makes sense if, from above, this water ball is just one celestial body on a larger board. I need you to clock that. Blue planet is astronomy vocabulary sneaking into a pirate story. And Skypiea is not some one-off gag arc the author regrets and quietly buries. Oda keeps reaching back up, Weatheria in the time skip. Urouge chilling on a sky island in a random cutaway. Big Mum's territory casually featuring structures in the upper atmosphere. Even the way Nami's whole profession is about reading insane vertical weather anomalies. We need to stop treating these as quirky world building and start filing them under vertical foreshadowing. Because this is not a sin. This is not bad or overindulgent writing. This is intentional training. Every time Oda sends us up, into the sky, into the clouds, into the stratosphere, he's rewiring how you imagine the map. The world stops being a flat sheet you cross and becomes a Jenga tower you climb. Sky, then whatever Enel finds when he just keeps going. And listen to me, once you accept that the story's true map is vertical, a new problem appears. If the sky is already crowded with islands and seas, what exactly is waiting above that? Because the next layer Oda shows us isn't another cloud. It's a cratered rock with ruins and robots. And that's where Verth crashes the party. Because once you've climbed the sea and the sky and hit the moon, Oda suddenly starts obsessing over the most boring thing imaginable: dirt. In Skypiea, Verth isn't just ground. It's a sacred resource. It's currency, culture, and religion all mashed into one extremely mundane substance. Upper Yard is treated as this miraculous paradise, specifically because it has real soil instead of those soft cloud islands everyone else is stuck on. That's the gag land. The thing you and I trip over every day is being worshipped like a god drop-shipped it from Amazon Prime heaven. Here's the thing. On a normal Earth-like planet, dirt is not a collectible. You don't mythologize the sidewalk. If your world is a standard blue marble, soil is the default texture pack, not a legendary loot drop. The fact that Skypians talk about Verth in hushed tones, that Ganfall treats Upper Yard as this once-in-a-lifetime blessing, tells you something is fundamentally off in the background geometry of this story. Land shouldn't be rare enough to need branding. And Oda doubles down on the branding. He doesn't call it ground. He gives it a proper noun. Earth. Capital V. That's not just world-building flavour. That's the author putting a big neon highlighter over the concept of true soil. He's saying, pay attention to this category of matter. This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is intentional. Then Enel leaves. He does the thing every sky person daydreams about and goes to Fairy Verth, his mythical promised land. And where is it? Not some hidden continent on the blue sea, the moon. The cover story shows him stepping onto a cratered surface that turns out to be rich in Verth, with ruins and automata and murals of winged people migrating to a blue planet. Suddenly the pattern is obvious even to a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast. Habitable soil exists in discrete pockets on multiple celestial bodies. So we need to ask, why is real ground being treated as a scarce, almost serialized commodity across sky and moon contexts? Why does the story keep making you notice where true soil is and isn't? Because the repetition is the foreshadowing. The obsession is the clue. Oda is quietly teaching you that in this universe, Verth is controlled, limited, managed. That scarcity makes way more sense if we're not on a healthy, untouched planet, but on a terraformed or partially destroyed world. Picture a system where advanced civilizations carved up or repaired dead rocks, seeding certain regions with Verth and leaving others as ocean, cloud, or wasteland. Upper Yard isn't just a lucky island. It's a leftover tile from an older planetary jigsaw. And I need you to hold that image, because once you start treating Verth as a manufactured asset, the rest of One Piece's impossible geography stops being a quirky map and starts reading like infrastructure. And here's where we need to do a pattern break, because I know what some of you are quietly thinking. Sure, Verth is weird, but Skypiea is the goofy cloud arc. It's a tonal detour. It feels filler adjacent. Listen to me. That reaction is normal. This is not a sin. When you binge One Piece, Skypiea hits right after Alabaster's grounded desert war, and suddenly we're on trampolines made of clouds, fighting a shirtless lightning god with drums on his back. Your brain files it under Oda having fun, instead of Oda doing core cosmology. But go back and list what actually lives in that arc. Verth as a named resource that sky people are starving for. Multiple winged races with different cultures and histories. A literal ancient city buried in the clouds, sitting on top of a knocked-up island of real soil. Repeated, explicit references to the moon and Fairy Verth. That's not tonal fluff. That's a catalogue of world structure anomalies, all in one controlled environment, right when the Grand Line is supposed to open up. Here's the thing. Skypiea is the first true Grand Line weirdness arc. This is the author telling you, intentionally, this is the baseline for how strange I'm allowed to get. The Calm Belt and Reverse Mountain are geography problems. Drum and Alabaster are political problems. Skypiea is the first time the story says the world itself is wrong, and nobody in universe understands why. That's not an outlier category, that's the template. And then Oda quietly bolts it straight onto the main mystery spine. The Shandorian ruins are covered in poneglyph-era architecture. Robin literally reads a poneglyph there. The Golden Bell is not just a cool set piece. It's a void sentry broadcast tower, ringing out the location of the ancient kingdom's message across sea and sky. Enel is standing on a piece of the same history as O'Hara and Wano. He's just too busy playing God to care. Now, pattern interrupt. What happens if you stop treating Skypiea as a self-contained sky island and start reading it as a vertical cross-section diagram? Sea at the bottom, sky in the middle, space at the top. Suddenly, Enel's "I'm going to the moon" gag cover story stops being a meme and turns into a straight-line continuation of the arc's premise. The automata on the moon, the murals of winged people leaving for a blue planet, the term fairy verth for rich land above the world, all of that retroactively reframes Skypiea as step one in an off-world ladder. Once you do that, Vegapunk's ancient tech, the idea of Uranus as a sky or space-based weapon, even the way people say blue sea and blue planet start to feel planned, not random. I need you to notice the difference in storytelling category here. This isn't a fun island Oda remembered and reused. This is a structural blueprint he introduced early and has been quietly paying off. And when we follow Enel all the way to the moon in the next section, Skypiea stops reading as a quirky cloud vacation and starts looking like the first rung on a very old escape plan. When Enel rockets off into space in a golden drum UFO, most of the community went, "Haha, peak gag, Oda's so random," and moved on. I need you to understand how insane that is. Because that cover story, that is not a meme. That is the author quietly switching genres on you in the margins. Quick recap so we're on the same page. Enel loses in Skypiea, refuses to accept reality, and blasts himself to what he calls fairy verth, the moon. Once he gets there, he doesn't just sit on a crater throne and roleplay God. He breaks into a ruined complex, discovers buried automata, accidentally powers up a hidden reactor, and literally reboots an ancient lunar city. Pipes roar to life. Panels open. An entire underground metropolis wakes up because a lightning man touched the power grid. This isn't pirate adventure anymore. This is an abandoned space station side quest. And then he finds the murals. Here's the thing. If you strip away the One Piece art style and just describe those walls, you're reading a straight sci-fi pitch. Winged people on the moon. Winged people building cities with robots. Then winged people boarding crafts and leaving the moon for a blue planet covered in water. The panels literally walk you through interplanetary migration, origin point, moon, destination, blue planet. And the story is spelling out the Scapians, Shandians, Birkans all came from off-world, and fans still went neat doodles. Now remember the word verth. In Skypiea, soil is this holy resource. Actual dirt is rarer than devil fruits. The entire arc is people killing each other over a patch of land with real ground. Enel calls the moon fairy verth, a mythical rich land. Not water, not clouds. Land. So now you have two separate societies obsessing over the same concept of scarce soil. One on a sky island and one on the moon. And we need to pretend that's not intentional planetary world building? Look at the aesthetic of that moon city. Massive conduits, reactors, mass-produced robots with maintenance hatches, control rooms that feel more NASA than Marineford. Even with Vegapunk stuff, the current era tech is goofy retro future at best. On the moon, it's clean industrial sci-fi. You can feel the category shift in the art. It's not wacky gadget, it's this civilization solved space travel and power distribution centuries ago. If any other series did this, if any other author showed you murals of people emigrating from the moon to a blue planet and waking up robots in a buried base, fans would instantly scream, "Oh, it's a secret space opera." But because Oda hides it in a cover story, in a pirate manga, the community mentally filed it under fun extra instead of core lore. This is not a sin. This is normal pattern avoiding behavior when your brain is busy counting bounties. Listen to me. Enel on the moon is the smoking gun. It's the moment the story quietly tells you we are not on default Earth. And when you put that next to Vegapunk's line about ancient hyper-advanced technology, the Void Century stops being just a lost history and starts looking suspiciously like a fallen spacefaring age. Which raises a problem the story is absolutely going to cash in on later. If the moon was fairy Earth and this ocean ball is the blue planet on the mural, what else is up there? And how much of Laughtale's true history is actually off-world? So if the moon is fairy Earth and the blue marble on that mural is our ocean ball, then we need to talk about the people actually walking that migration path. Because the story doesn't just give you a mysterious space ruin and call it a day. It hands you 3 very specific winged peoples and then quietly lines them up with 3 very specific moon drawings. On the surface, we have Skypians, Shandians and Burkans. Same core silhouette, human frame, small feathered wings on their backs, cloud dials, shell tech, all that. But culturally, completely different categories. Skypians are the complacent cloud aristocrats doing their weird angel cosplay. Shandians are the warrior diaspora clinging to land, history, and a god they can't reach. Burkans, Enel's people, are the outlier island of mad scientists and thunder weirdos. Shared biology, divergent societies. This is not random fantasy race generator behavior. Now go back to Enel's cover story. Those murals in the moon ruins don't show one generic angel crowd. They show 3 distinct winged groups marching off the lunar surface toward a single blue planet. 3 groups on the wall, the 3 sky tribes in the story. I need you to understand how intentional that parallel is. This isn't the author accidentally drawing 3 for aesthetics. This is visual foreshadowing of a population split. Here's the thing. Once you line those up, the "they're just fun cloud people" reading collapses. The murals are literally an origin story in pictures. Every single week, a technological city, then Exodus, then a blue planet. The simplest, least galaxy brain interpretation is that Skypians, Shandians and Burkans are descendants of extraterrestrial migrants. Not metaphorical, they came from the stars in a poetic sense. Actual off-world colonists who landed on this blue sea sphere and then fragmented over centuries. And the tech backs this up. Skypa is drowning in advanced relics it clearly doesn't understand. Dials that store elements, island clouds that behave more engineered than natural, giant ancient ruins that predate current culture. Enel finds literal space-age automata buried in the moon, then powers them with his lightning, and they boot up like someone just plugged in an old console. Vegapunk later tells you, straight-faced, that the world used to have technology beyond his own. This is not a sin, this is not a coincidence, this is the same collapsed civilization echoing in different corners of the narrative. So when fans hand-wave the wings as Oda being whimsical, I need you to stop and remember those murals. The wings are a biological receipt. The ruins are the invoice. The migration map is the tracking number. The cleanest reading? Once upon a time, there was a high-tech civilization on the moon. Something went catastrophically wrong. The survivors relocated to a blue planet, bringing scraps of knowledge that decayed into myths, ruins, and half-remembered sky cultures. Whether that planet is our Earth is actually the less interesting question. The important part for the story is that it's distinct, constructed, and being treated as a controlled environment, which then raises an uglier question we need to stare at. If the people fell from the moon, who or what built the cage they fell into? If the cage is down here, the crime scene is up there. Because when Enel crash lands on the moon, he does not find a goofy little ruin with some steampunk gears. He finds a dead civilization running hardware that makes most of the blue planet look prehistoric. We're talking self-sustaining energy systems, giant power conduits under the lunar surface, automata that boot back up once he reconnects the grid. That's not ancient ruins. That's someone left the server room on standby for 1,000 years. You get batteries, reactors, whole networks of pipes and cables delivering power to an underground city. The robots aren't charming mascots, they are maintenance drones. The murals show winged people leaving the moon for a blue world, and Enel calls the rich land up there fairy Verth, because from his perspective, the good stuff was always supposed to be off-planet. That is a tech stack and a worldview the surface has absolutely no business having, unless something went very wrong. Now, fast forward to Egghead. Vegapunk is over here casually printing food, splitting his brain into satellites, and recreating Mother Flame tier energy sources. And then he drops the line that quietly detonates the whole community. The world 900 years ago had technology far beyond the present. Not comparable. Beyond. The author doesn't have him say that for flavor. That's intentional calibration. Oda is telling you the Void Century isn't medieval mystery lore. It's the aftermath of a sci-fi collapse. Visually and functionally, the Moon City and Egghead feel like cousins. Clean white structures, energy domes, autonomous labor, everything wired into some centralized power philosophy. I need you to notice the category difference here. This isn't, oh wow, they had fancy ships. This is interlinked infrastructure that assumes you can move power and people across absurd distances. When the murals show Birkans, Shandians, Skypeans departing the moon for the blue planet, that reads less myth of origin and more corporate relocation program. So we need to ask the very uncomfortable question: if the ancient kingdom sat at the center of that same technological sphere, are we actually looking at a multi-orbital civilization? Because once you admit these people did space, then planetary engineering stops being a wild tinfoil reach and starts being the boring, inevitable next step. Terraforming, orbital habitats, planetary shields. This is not a sin. This is normal for a culture that can casually abandon the moon. And suddenly the red line and the grand line stop being Oda's wacky geography and start reading as infrastructure. A perfect vertical wall wrapping the globe. A single, impossible sea current bisecting the planet. Calm belts that function as natural minefields. If two or more advanced factions went to war during the Void Century, the outcome doesn't have to be one kingdom fell. The outcome can be the entire planet got patched, partitioned, and locked, which leaves you with the ugliest foreshadowing question of all. If that moon city is a fossil from the age that built our cage, what exactly did they do to this blue planet? And how much of the wrong world map we're sailing on is just the after image of a weapon they fired? So here's where I need you to stop doing the thing we all do. We treat cover stories as mean fuel right up until Oda cashes one in, and then suddenly everyone was a day one believer. Caribou shows up drooling in the background for 50 chapters. Joke. Caribou turns out to be carrying Blackbeard-adjacent intel and gets folded back into the main plot. Oh yeah, I always knew his cover story was important. No, you didn't. This is pattern-seeking monkey behavior. We see Jesus in toast and then swear it was a planned fresco. Listen to me. The community has a double standard problem. CP9's Where Are They Now saga, treated as a victory lap gag until Lucci walked back in as a government attack dog, and suddenly that whole recovery arc is obvious foreshadowing. Begay's goofy mafia family honeymoon, background noise until Whole Cake Island reframes him as a key political player, and those panels become essential character work. We clown on these stories in real time, then retroactively promote them into the canon we pretend we were always tracking. But here's the thing. Oda has been screaming the actual category at us for decades. Cover stories are not filler, they're a second camera. While the Straw Hats are locked on one island, the author cuts away to show you what the rest of the world is doing, in-universe, on the same timeline. Character fates get resolved there, world events progress there. Buggy's rise, Hachi's redemption, Wapol's comeback, Jinbei's status, all of that is plotted, intentional, and later collides with the main narrative. And then there's Enel. If this was just a gag space trip, why does Oda spend so many chapters methodically walking him through an ancient moon city, dormant automata, murals of winged people leaving for the blue planet, and the term fairy Verth for a rich land above the sky? That is not throwaway doodle energy. That is the same careful, slow burn storytelling he uses for every major foreshadowing thread. He just moved the camera off the sunny to show it to you. Ignoring that because it's only a cover story is the Marvel post-credit problem. You can absolutely walk out when the credits roll. This is fine, this is normal. But if you skip the stinger where Thanos picks up the gauntlet, you don't then get to be confused 3 movies later and say, wow, that came out of nowhere. The post-credit scene is optional for casuals, not for people who want the full picture of the writing. So no, the space theory is not reading too much into a gag. It's taking Oda at his word that these side stories are real events in the same continuity, shot with the same camera, just pointed somewhere the crew can't see yet. And if you were going to hide the biggest setting secret in the story, off-world civilizations, a patched planet, the truth of the blue planet label, where else would you stash it but in the panels the fandom keeps pretending don't count? Which means the question isn't, does Enel on the moon matter? The question is, what other jokes are we still sleeping on? But now we have to talk about the one man in the story who basically looks at Enel's moon slideshow and goes, yeah, that tracks. Vegapunk gets up on Egghead and casually drops the most deranged lore bomb in the series. 900 plus years ago, there was a civilization with technology beyond even his own, and his entire career has been one long group project to plagiarize their homework. He is the smartest guy in the world, the peak of intentional planned science in this setting, and is telling you he's still behind the curve. That's not, they had slightly better swords. That's a categorical gap. That's an author waving a giant sign that says your tech ceiling is in the wrong place, because Egghead already feels soft sci-fi. We've got solid holograms you can touch, a climate-controlling dome, light-based weapons, food machines, memory backups, and a literal island-sized energy system powering it all. There is a giant robot from the Void Century that can punch a marine battleship. This is not quirky steampunk. This is Star Trek convention crashed into a pirate manga. And Vegapunk still frames it as a rough reconstruction of something better. Here's the thing. We've already seen the something better. It's on the moon, and Enel walks into that buried city and finds ancient automata, power systems and murals of winged people emigrating from the moon to a blue planet. The term fairy Earth gets thrown around because from their perspective, rich land in the sky and a blue planet, Vegapunk's tech and the moon tech are not two separate miracles. They're descendants of the same technological heritage. Whether you call that heritage the ancient kingdom or a full interplanetary network, the pattern is the same. Advanced energy, autonomous robots, off-world travel as a solved problem, not a dream. And if a civilization can do all of that and maybe build weapons in the Uranus tier, then we need to expand the overpowered sci-fi nonsense menu. Terraforming, planetary scale engineering, suddenly not off the table. Listen to me. If you can make a robot that still moves after 900 years and a weapon that terrifies the world government a millennium later, carving a red line around a world or stitching together seas is just a bigger engineering project. The community keeps treating Egghead as wow, the world is more advanced than we thought. But the subtext is, this world was designed by someone playing Sim Planet on nightmare difficulty. And Vegapunk is not proud of this. He is scared. His whole confession is drenched in awe and dread. He talks about forbidden research, about a power source so efficient it threatens the existing order, about a past conflict that erased an entire era of progress. That doesn't sound like a simple political coup. That sounds like a war over who gets the keys to an artificial world. I need you to clock that emotional tone because it reframes the Void Century. If the planet itself is a constructed asset, then the ancient kingdom versus continuations isn't just rebels versus tyrants. It's rival admins fighting over the root password to reality, which raises a worse question. If someone already won that fight, what exactly are they still hiding from us under all this water and stone? So if the planet is an asset, a piece of infrastructure, then the ancient weapons stop being mythical nukes and start looking a lot more specific. They look like admin tools. And listen to me. Once you put them in that category, their descriptions suddenly stop being vague fantasy and start reading like a manual. Here's the thing. On paper, we know three basic things. Pluton is a colossal warship whose blueprints were dangerous enough that Tom was willing to die for them. Poseidon is not a cannon but a person, a mermaid princess who can command sea kings. Uranus is the mystery box, only ever tied to the sky and to the world government's terrifying unseen power. That's the surface level summary the community can recite in its sleep. But if the seas themselves are part of the prison, Poseidon is not just good for naval warfare. Poseidon is route access to the ocean's firewall. Sea kings are not random kaiju. They are the living teeth of the calm belt, the reason normal ships cannot safely cross those borders. When Shirahoshi cries and the Sea Kings drag Noah, that's not just a cool emotional moment. That's an example of the system flipping from kill intruders to protect cargo. She can toggle the safety of sea travel on a global scale. That is not a buff. That is infrastructure control. Uranus is even worse. Sky-themed, unseen, activated by the government, and somehow so terrifying that it can keep the entire world in check without ever being shown. You do not need to be a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast to connect this to the climate nonsense in One Piece. Permanent lightning islands, upside-down waterfalls, random snow in alabaster flashbacks, the calm belt's dead air. If Uranus is an orbital or high-atmosphere system, weather modulation, gravity manipulation, even tiny orbital nudges, that explains why the blue planet behaves like a rigged game. You don't design that for fun. And every single week, you design that to make rebellion physically miserable. Now bring Pluton back in. Everyone treats super warship as shorthand for big cannon go boom. But if you already have sea guardians and orbital climate control, what are you missing? Direct force projection into hostile environments, a ship engineered to operate in extreme pressure zones, frozen altitudes, maybe even low orbit. The blueprints being so dangerous that simply existing is a crime makes more sense if Pluton can go where normal ships and even Sea Kings cannot. A mobile platform that can traverse every layer of a constructed world is a different storytelling category from big battleship. Put them together and you get a neat triad. Poseidon governs the seas, Uranus governs the sky, and near space, Pluton is the hammer you send anywhere those systems expose a weakness. Sea, sky, slash, space, and force. That is exactly what you would plan if your job was to manage or conquer a planet prison. And if those are just the tools we've heard about, we need to ask a worse question. What system are they all plugged into? And who's actually holding the master key? So if Pluton and Poseidon are clearly plugged into that system, Uranus is the one terrifying blank space in the circuit diagram. We know it exists. We know it mattered enough to help erase an entire century. And yet, on the page, it's the quiet kid in the back of the class who somehow has launch codes. Here's the thing. Every time Oda even brushes up against Uranus, the framing goes vertical. Sky, heavens, upper atmosphere. The name itself is an ancient sky god. The only explicit god we see casually erasing an island from orbit, Imu, staring at a map while something from above deletes Lulusia. The one arc that screams, "This is the prototype for a sky weapon," Skypiea, with lightning from the clouds and a self-proclaimed god sitting on a throne in the sky. I need you to clock how different that is from normal naval warfare. A battleship fires on a harbour. A buster call annihilates a coastline. Whatever hit Lulusia did not care about ships, currents, or even the sea as a category. It was an edit to the map itself. Fans in the community immediately went, weather control, floating islands, ancient weapon. This is normal. This is what happens when you give pattern-seeking monkeys a panel that looks one step removed from a satellite strike. And the weather control angle is not a stretch. We have a series that has already given us a man who turns into lightning, a scientist who can bottle weather, and islands where the climate changes at the border like someone flipped a setting. A weapon that governs jet streams, pressure systems, or even the density of air itself is not a new genre. It's just the logical top shelf of a system Oda has been carefully normalizing. Now, zoom out. If any ancient weapon is going to be tied to orbital mechanics, planetary shields, or literal altitude between worlds, It's the one named after the sky. Pluton is horizontal destruction across the sea, as Poseidon is horizontal command over the sea. Uranus, by process of elimination and by every visual hint, is vertical, up and down, between ground, cloud, and whatever counts as outside this prison planet. It's the only one that even plausibly reads as a remote control for the boundary conditions of the world. And Oda will not shut up about looking up. Luffy lying on the deck staring at the sky, Pika dancing under the sun. The sun god drums, the giant smile literally framed against the heavens. Every time the story wants to talk about freedom, the camera tilts up. Skypiea, Shandora's bell, reach the higher seas, all of it is training you to associate liberation with altitude. So listen to me, when we finally see Uranus, what happens if it's not a cannon at all? What happens if it's a key, not to a door in Mariajoy, but to the actual architecture of the planet, to the true shape of the world that Enel, staring down from the moon at a blue planet, has already seen? Because if Uranus turns out to be the mechanism that opens the sky itself, we need to ask a much dumber, much scarier question. What exactly is supposed to come through when that lock finally turns? So here's where we stop thinking in terms of ancient kingdom got cooed and start thinking in terms of someone patched the planet. Because listen to me, if Uranus is a key to the sky, then the Void Century stops being a missing history book and starts being a missing patch log. We know the basics. 800 to 900 years ago, there was an ancient kingdom with tech Vegapunk straight up calls superior to his own. That kingdom fought a coalition that eventually branded itself the world government. The losers were erased. Name, their records, their language, wiped so hard that just studying a rock with some verbs on it gets you a buster call. This is not a normal regime change. This is not we don't talk about that one embarrassing king. Here's the thing. You do not delete an entire century, criminalize research, and start hunting archaeologists across generations because you're embarrassed about a constitutional crisis. That when the very category of what the world is has changed, and you need everyone to agree it has always been this way. That's not a political cover-up. That's witness protection for a planet. And the timing is suspicious in a way that should make your inner pattern-seeking monkey, the one that sees Jesus in toast and Joy Boy in every silhouette, go berserk. Vegapunk pegs that hyper-advanced civilization at roughly 900 years ago. Enel's moon cover story shows an ancient automata city, murals of winged people abandoning fairy Verth for a blue planet, and tech that visually rhymes with what Vegapunk is trying to reinvent. These are not random space doodles. They are two data points on the same collapse curve. I need you to notice the synchronization. Moon civilization declines. Ancient kingdom falls. World government rises. At the same rough moment, the world just happens to end up with a perfectly straight continuous landmass, the red line, and a single ocean current belt that wraps the globe at a right angle, the grand line, flanked by unnavigable calm belts. That isn't geology, that's grid lines. What if the Void Century War wasn't just about who ruled the seas, but what shape the seas even had? What if the red line and grand line are not obstacles in a natural world, but intentional structures in a weaponized one? A containment system, a way to chop a previously open planet into quarantine biomes, to strand sky people on fragments, to turn the blue planet that Enel sees into a locked room. Under that reading, the world government isn't just hiding who won, they're hiding what was done. They're curating a fake default reality where this patched, cross-shaped ocean world is treated as original hardware instead of a repurposed body in a larger cosmic network. And if that's true, then the One Piece, the final island, the true history Robin is chasing, stops being a lore dump and becomes something much worse. Documentation of a jailbreak. Which raises the next problem we need to talk about. Who exactly got locked in here with us? So when I say who got locked in here with us, I need you to zoom out from characters and look at the hardware, not the lore, not the prophecies, the literal shape of the prison. Because the most suspicious thing in One Piece is not a devil fruit or a poneglyph or a giant robot. It's the red line. Here's the thing. On a reread, the red line does not behave like a continent. It behaves like a scar. You get those globe shots and it's just this sheer, continuous wall of rock, a perfect loop around the planet, barely any macro variation, no big deltas, no broken chains of islands, no massive bays carving into it. It's a belt. It's a ring. It's the world's worst highway divider someone wrapped around the equator and then forgot to take down. Compare that to actual geology. Real supercontinents fracture. They twist. They leave behind messy archipelagos and random subcontinents that make your middle school atlas look drunk. The red line is the opposite of that. It's clean. It's singular. It crosses the grand line at a perfect right angle and just happens to form a planetary crosshair. You can hand wave one coincidence. Two, that we're in full pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast territory if you keep calling this natural. Now, in sci-fi, when you see something encircling a planet in a perfect band, you do not say, "Ah, yes, tectonic plates." You say Dyson ring. You say orbital elevator spine. You say planet-girdling wall, some long-dead civilization built to keep something in or out. The category shifts from geology to infrastructure. And that category difference matters because suddenly you stop asking, how did the rocks move? And start asking, who commissioned this project and what problem were they solving? And Oda keeps treating the red line as infrastructure in the story. Mariejo is not just on it. It crowns it. The Holy Land of the Celestial Dragons is literally seated on the spine of the world. The route to Fishman Island is drilled through it, a controlled tunnel that dictates which ships get to descend to the world below and under what conditions. This isn't background art, this is planned, intentional staging. Power in One Piece is physically bolted into the red line. So what happens if you stop reading it as a continent and start reading it as a shell, or a containment band, or the cooled scar of a planetary scale weapon? Suddenly the calm belt stops being a quirky sea mechanic and starts feeling like the dead zone around a blast line. The Grand Line stops being a wacky adventure route and becomes the seam where two halves of a damaged world were stitched together. Pattern interrupt. What if the red line isn't where the world grew, but where the world broke? Once you do that mental flip, a lot of Oda's world above versus world below obsession snaps into focus. The segregation between sky people and blue sea people, humans and fishmen, celestial dragons and everyone else, stops being purely social commentary and starts reading as foreshadowing for a deeper architectural truth. The planet itself has been redesigned to enforce those categories. This is not bad writing. This is in fact exactly what you would do if you were an author hiding a space prison twist in plain sight. And if the red line is the scar, then we need to talk about the weapon that made it and the civilization that thought carving a ring into a planet was a reasonable solution. So if the red line is the scar, the poneglyphs are the black boxes scattered around the crash site. And I need you to stop treating them as just lore tablets for trivia night. They are not flavor text. They are not cute exposition rocks. They are the one part of the setting that behaves as if the world itself is not trustworthy. Here's the thing. In universe, these are described as nearly indestructible stone blocks, carved with a forbidden history that the world government will literally erase your island over. The O'Hara flashback is not subtle. A single island of nerds tries to read the black boxes, and the response is a global superweapon. That is not how you react to a mildly embarrassing national archive. That is how you react to evidence of a crime scene you cannot afford anyone to reconstruct. And look at how much effort went into them. You do not commission god-tier stoneworking from Wano's Kozuki clan, encode your entire civilization into unbreakable monoliths, and then yeet them across the globe because you are worried about what? A fire in the library? No. You do that because you are planning for censorship and catastrophe. You are planning for the author of the planet to take a second pass at the geography. We need to talk about placement. These things are not sitting in town squares with plaques. They are buried in Alabaster's royal tombs. They are at the bottom of the sea in Fishman Island. They are in the sky on Sky Pier, where the normal humans of the Blue Sea were never supposed to reach. Vertically, they are everywhere. Underground, underwater, above the clouds. That distribution pattern is screaming a specific fear. The surface is not safe. If you think the world is going to stay basically the same, you put your records in a vault, maybe a bunker if you are paranoid. But if you think the oceans might rise, the continents might move, or an entire planetary ring wall might be carved into existence, suddenly the strategy changes. You start doing what aircraft engineers do. You build black boxes. You make them absurdly durable. You put redundant copies in multiple layers of the environment so that no single flood, no single tectonic tantrum, no single space laser can wipe the slate completely clean. This is not a sin. This is not overreading. This is, in fact, the only way the Poneglyph project makes sense. The authors were not just hiding from a government. They were hedging against a world reboot, and that loops us right back into the Void Century. If the red line is the scar of a terraforming weapon, then the Poneglyphs are the last honest witnesses of the pre-scare world, written by people who fully expected the map, the sea level, maybe even the sky itself to be rearranged. They are the one continuous thread tying sky islands, the deep sea, and the surface into a single intentional record. So the question is not, what do they say? The real question is, what kind of enemy makes you assume the planet will not survive in its current form? Because once you answer that, the ancient kingdom stops being a lost nation and starts looking a lot more extraterrestrial. So when you hear Rio Poneglyph, I need you to erase the idea that it's just a lore dump with better calligraphy. The story has told you, very calmly, that this one stone holds the complete, unbroken history of the Void Century, compiled from every other poneglyph scattered around the world. That is not a fun trivia page. That is the master document. And here's the thing. A complete history is not just a list of who stabbed who in what war. Real historians don't start with, so anyway, 20 kingdoms attacked this one guy. They start with maps. They start with coastlines, trade routes, climate, what the sky looked at night. If the Rio Poneglyph is the final synthesis of all these intentional records, then somewhere on that stone is the answer to a very basic question. What did this planet look like before the red line, the Grand Line, and this insane 4 oceans in a trench coat configuration existed? We need to sit with that, because the geography in One Piece is already screaming constructed object. The red line and Grand Line form a perfect cross around the globe. The calm belts act as natural force fields. Sky islands hang in the air, while a moon labelled Fairyverse has murals of people leaving for a blue planet. When Vegapunk tells you that ancient technology was more advanced than anything in the present, that's not just flavour, that is the author quietly moving you into a different category of story, from fantasy archipelago to post-spacefaring Fallout. So what does the true history actually say? The most straightforward, least galaxy brain reading is that it spells it out. This world was altered, or constructed, or straight up imported. The seas were rearranged as a cage. The continents were carved into a crosshair, and the current world government is squatting on the ruins of a planet that is not a natural Earth. This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is just an author finally cashing in on 20 years of foreshadowing about the true world and the sea below the sea. And suddenly, Roger's reaction at Laugh Tale makes a disgusting amount of sense. You read that stone, you see the full diagram, and you realize your entire pirate adventure has been happening on a broken game board a previous civilization left behind. Do you cry? Or do you laugh the way a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast laughs, because the joke is so much bigger than your personal drama? Remember, Oda went out of his way to tell you, Roger didn't weep in despair. He laughed. He named the last island Laugh Tale. That is not the tone of, welp, the government is evil. That is the tone of, oh my god, the whole planet is a prop. So when Luffy finally gets there, when he stands in front of that same stone, the punchline might be brutally simple. You haven't been sailing the world. You've been sailing on one piece of a much larger cosmic game board. And the real ocean, The real Verth that might be waiting just past the edge of the map the series has been pretending is complete. And this is where the Will of D stops being a fun trivia tag and starts looking like a design feature of the prison. We treat the D as a surname, a quirky naming convention. Oh, isn't it neat that all the troublemakers share an initial? No. Here's the thing. In story, the people who actually know anything keep reacting to that letter like it's a radioactive isotope. Roger, Luffy, Ace, Law, Garp, Teach, Rox, even Rouge by extension. Every time that D shows up, the world government flinches. The Gorosei literally call them natural enemies of the gods. That's not a vibe. That's a category. When you zoom out, the pattern gets worse. D-bearers don't just share personality traits. They share narrative gravity. They bend the plot. They drag the story toward the seams of the world. Roger sails to the end and laughs at the truth. Luffy punches celestial dragons, liberates islands, awakens the Nika fruit that the government has been terrified of for centuries. Law dismantles the Shichibukai system and escorts us straight into the heart of the Void Century mystery. Blackbeard abuses the Yami fruit, breaks Impel down, steals Whitebeard's Quake power, and is clearly being positioned as a cosmic scale problem. They're not random rebels. They're magnets for confrontation with the hidden order. Now, if the planet is a constructed stage, I need you to at least entertain the nastier version of this. The D might not just be a bloodline from the ancient kingdom. They might be the bloodline that remembers before the stage. Enel's moon cover story shows winged people leaving the moon for the blue planet. Ancient Automata, Fairy Verth as the real rich land. Vegapunk tells us there was hyper-advanced tech 900 years ago. Put those together and suddenly D starts to look a lot less like Don Quixote and a lot more like descendants of an off-world civilization that either built this place or was trapped in it. And that enemy of the gods label, on the surface, sure, that's the celestial dragons and their whole cosplay Olympus routine. But if this planet is a controlled environment, a containment grid drawn with the red line and grand line, then gods might not just mean pampered nobles. It might mean whoever or whatever is running the simulation, the higher level system, the original terraformers. The celestial dragons would just be middle management with better hats. So the Will of D stops being mystical destiny and starts reading as a long-term project. This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is, in fact, exactly what an intentional pre-written endgame would do. You seed a bloodline that carries either the literal genetics or the cultural memory of the pre-altered world, and then you watch over generations as they keep trying to break the toy. Boy fails, Roger runs out of time. Luffy, bearing both D and Nika, gets another shot. And we need to say this out loud. That's not prophecy. That's engineering. Someone somewhere planned for a lineage that would eventually reconnect this fake ocean globe to the larger universe. Which raises the next problem. If there's a jailbreak in progress, what exactly are the bars made of? If the bars are made of anything, they're made of direction. Not just you can't go there, but you can't even imagine up there. And this is exactly where Nika walks in, grinning, drumming, and setting the vertical axis of the story on fire. So, quick recap. In universe, Nika is a legendary sun god, whispered about by slaves who needed something, anything to believe in. He's associated with liberation, joy and chains snapping off so hard they may as well achieve escape velocity. That's the oral tradition. That's the myth. But remember what we've been saying. In One Piece, myth is usually foreshadowing wearing a funny hat. When an author keeps a symbol around this long, that's intentional. That's planned. Enter Gear 5. Luffy's Nika form is not subtle. His body turns white, outlined in light. His hair and clothes move with this elastic flame-adjacent aura. He bends, stretches and rubberizes not just himself but the environment, the ground, even lightning. Physics stops being a rule and becomes a suggestion. That's not just power escalation. That is cartoon logic injected into a supposedly closed system. I need you to clock that. The moment Nika fully manifests, the world's rules become negotiable. Now, here's the thing. We in the community keep treating the sun motif as this super basic light vs darkness metaphor. Joy versus misery, freedom versus oppression. This is fine. This is normal. But it's also incomplete. The sun is literally the thing you look up at. It sits in the one direction this world keeps telling you is irrelevant. Red line goes around, grand line goes around, calm belt goes around. Everything is horizontal. The entire planetary layout is a containment grid that says, sail in circles, don't think in columns. Nika's entire deal is saying no to that. His silhouette is above the slaves. His drums are heard overhead. Luffy's Gear 5 fights are framed with him bouncing off ceilings, ricocheting into the sky, punching down from absurd heights. Even the sound design in the anime leans into this ascending drumbeat cadence. Vertical, upward, out. So when we say Nika is a liberator, we need to expand the category. It's not just people in chains. It's populations in a terrarium. It's an entire species stuck under a lid, told that Blue Sea is the whole universe, while the actual cosmos is treated as forbidden trivia. Joy Boy fails to break the toy. Roger fails to finish the game. Luffy, as Nika is the first person whose power set literally enables him to treat the world's surface as a trampoline, which leads to the uncomfortable, pattern-seeking, monkey who sees Jesus in toast question. What if the final act of liberation isn't just toppling the world government, but tearing open the sky itself? Not metaphorically, literally puncturing whatever shell, dome, or engineered atmosphere is hiding the true stars. Imagine the last war ending not with a throne room speech, but with Nika's fist punching through the ceiling of the planet, and the sun god finally revealing where the real sun has been this whole time. And if that's where we're going, then the next problem is obvious. What evidence do we have that the sky is actually a lid, and not just me losing my mind on Maine? So here's the thing. Before we even touch evidence, we need to talk about the invisible brick wall in your head. The wall that says, no, space is stupid. One Piece is a pirate story. I need you to notice that thought because that's not analysis. That's a genre label doing your thinking for you. We've all absorbed this idea that genres are little fenced-off playgrounds. Cowboys over here, robots over there, pirates somewhere in the back with scurvy. And if you dare to mix them, the community treats it as a joke. Space pirates? Sure, buddy, and next you'll tell me Zorro is secretly a Gundam. This is not a sin your brain is committing. This is normal. You've just been trained by marketing copy. But step back. Cowboy Bebop is literally a cowboy space opera. A Trigun is a sci-fi western. Gurren Lagann is a fantasy mecha myth about throwing galaxies. Treasure Planet exists. Outlaw Star literally has a ship that fistfights other ships in space. Every single week, genre mashup is not some cursed fanfic category. It's a standard tool in real storytelling. The difference is whether the author is intentional and planned about it. Pattern interrupt. If I told you pirates on floating islands powered by clouds and weather dragons, you'd say that sounds ridiculous too, right? Except that's just Sky PA with the serial numbers filed off. You already accepted fantasy weather science years ago. You already accepted zombies on Thriller Bark, political thriller in Alabasta, slapstick cartoon physics in Wano, and a full-on sci-fi lab in Egghead. One Piece has never been pure anything. It is already a blender. But when fans say space doesn't fit the story, I need you to ask, what story are you reading? Because the text on the page is quietly screaming, sci-fi. Pacifistas with laser beams modelled on a light-based admiral. Kuma doing what is essentially coordinate-locked teleportation. Vegapunk confirming that ancient technology 900 years ago surpassed the current era. Egghead literally being the island of the future and still a downgrade from the past. This is not random. This is foreshadowing for a scale upgrade. And then there's Enel's moon vacation, which the community keeps treating as Oda's weird side doodle instead of a loaded gun. Ancient Automata on the moon. Murals of winged people leaving the moon for a blue planet. The term blue planet, used in universe, as if someone is viewing this ocean world from the outside. You don't draw that if you're allergic to space. So stop thinking pirates versus space as if those are opposing teams. Start thinking pirates inside a larger cosmic prison. The red line and grand line already behave more like containment lines than natural geology. The calm belt is literally a no-escape border guarded by sea kings. If this is a cage, then the Straw Hats aren't abandoning the pirate fantasy when they hit the walls, they're fulfilling it. What's more pirate than realizing the whole sea is a jail cell and deciding to rob the warden? Because once you let that mental wall crack, the next question isn't, could One Piece go to space? It's, how much has already been pointing there without us admitting it? So if the whole sea might be a jail cell, we need to talk about the moat. Because the calm belt is not just some weird weather thing Oda drew once. It behaves like a system. It behaves like something an author would design if they wanted to foreshadow that this ocean was engineered. On paper, the calm belt is simple. No wind, no currents. Just two dead still bands wrapping the globe, hugging the Grand Line on both sides, filled with sea kings so huge that even marine warships treat them as raid bosses. For normal ships, it's a soft lock, you drift, you can't sail, and then a kaiju serpent decides your boat is a crouton. Now, here's the thing. Real oceans are rude. They have gyres, rogue waves, seasonal monsoons, El Niño tantrums. What they do not have are two perfectly parallel, perfectly calm, perfectly placed strips of death bracketing the single most important sea route on the planet. And that's not weather. That's level design. That's someone dragging a selection box around the Grand Line and hitting Add Security Perimeter. AL. Listen to me. Symmetry is a tell. In storytelling, when you see something this clean, this mirrored, you should get suspicious, because either the author is doing extremely intentional world building, or the in-universe engineers were. Two calm belts, equidistant, both functionally impassable without special tech or sea stone hulls. That's not just a fun map quirk. That's a category of infrastructure. Functionally, the calm belt funnels every serious sailor into one artery, the Grand Line. You want adventure, resources, poneglyphs, clout, you go through the corridor, which means anyone sitting at the choke point can monitor, tax, erase or rewrite history as needed. This is not subtle. This is the Panama Canal, the Suez Canal, and a firewall rule set rolled into one, except it wraps the entire planet. And once you frame it that way, the Prison Planet reading stops being a wild fan conspiracy and starts feeling unnervingly practical. The calm belt is the moat, the red line is the wall, and right where the wall and the corridor intersect, at the one place that touches every sea without ever being vulnerable to them, sits Mariewa, the castle, the throne, the perfect vantage point for a warden who never wants the inmates to realize there's anything beyond the yard. So how do you even get a calm belt? You're talking climate and current manipulation on a planetary scale. You're talking someone grabbing the jet streams and ocean gyres and pinning them into a stable configuration for centuries. Vegapunk already tells us the past had tech that makes the current age look medieval. Enel literally finds ancient automata and power systems on the moon. You really think a civilization that could do that couldn't press pause on two strips of ocean and seed them with bioengineered sea kings as guard dogs? I need you to realize, this is not a sin. This is not bad science. This is normal for engineered habitats. You build hard boundaries, you script traffic flow, you let time weather it so the prisoners forget it was ever a design. And if this whole arrangement is a moat, then the next question is obvious. What exactly were they trying so hard to keep us away from? So if the calm belt is the moat, then Reverse Mountain is the drawbridge, and not a cute touristy drawbridge with swans and gelato. It's a four-way waterslide of death that somehow counts as the world's main shipping lane. We need to slow down and actually picture what Oda drew there, because the community just accepts it as Hawaii Grand Line entrance and moves on. You've got four oceans, four blues, each with a current that doesn't just flow inward. It flows uphill. Water from every sea is climbing the same mountain. racing up 4 carved channels, meeting at a single summit, then dropping down the one shared throat into the Grand Line. From a real-world hydrodynamic standpoint, this is nonsense. This is not weird tide. This is the author stapled Mario Kart's Rainbow Road onto a planet and called it geography. Water does not spontaneously decide as a group to sprint up a cliff, merge, then politely file into one exit. You would need absurd pressure differentials, gravity shenanigans, or some kind of engineered pump system baked into the crust. But here's the thing. Narratively, it's perfect. It turns the entire Grand Line into a single, legal, socially accepted entrance exam. You want the Central Sea, you don't teleport. You don't just sail around the red line. You aim your ship at a vertical river, pray your navigator past trigonometry, and hope you don't die on the on-ramp. If you were designing a controlled experiment or a prison, this is exactly what you do. One dramatic bottleneck. One high-risk ramp that automatically filters the traffic. Only crews with enough tech, skill, or sheer stupidity make it through. Everyone else self-selects out by drowning before they can disturb your main test chamber. I need you to see how intentional that feels in the context of everything we've talked about. The calm belt is already a passive barrier. Reverse mountain is an active choke point. It's the metal detector at the airport, except the metal detector is a tsunami pointed the wrong way. And that raises the next problem. What even is reverse mountain in universe? The Red Line and Grand Line already form this impossible planetary cross, a containment grid that makes zero geological sense. So the most reasonable category to put reverse mountain in is byproduct of the same process. If someone carved or grew the Red Line as a ring wall, reverse mountain reads as an overflow valve in the planetary plumbing, a pressure release where all 4 blues get a single drain into the lab. This is fine. This is normal for engineered systems. You build the tank, then you build the safety vent so the tank doesn't explode. Reverse mountain feels exactly that, artificial. It's the one place the design peeks through the camouflage. So if even the front door of the ocean is a piece of machinery, if the very first current you touch on the way to the Grand Line is behaving more like a pump than a tide, but what does that say about the planet's origin and purpose? And more importantly, who needed a lock this big on a world this small? So if the world's front door is a machine, we need to talk about the basement. Because Fishman Island is not just a quirky underwater level, it's a structural error message in the planet's geology. Here's the thing, Oda tells you very calmly that Fishman Island is 10,000 meters under the sea, directly beneath the Red Line, not kind of deep, not wow, bring a jacket. Every single week, 10 kilometers straight down, under a continent-spanning wall, inside a gigantic air-filled bubble with artificial light and a functioning ecosystem. And the story just moves on. This is fine, this is normal. Except no, it isn't. You don't get breathable air, stable pressure, and a glowing tree that feeds an entire city at the bottom of the ocean by accident. That setup is not a cute fantasy backdrop. It's either a hollow cavity carved into the Red Line on a ludicrous scale, or it's a piece of ancient technology quietly doing planetary life support. Both options are a problem if you're still pretending this is just fantasy Earth but wetter. I need you to actually visualize the cross-section here. You've got the sea, then 10,000 meters of water. Then, instead of bedrock, there's a bubble big enough to hold a kingdom, with a ceiling that has to support the Red Line's mass above it. Either the Red Line is riddled with internal voids and reinforced shells, or something is actively maintaining that space against gravity and pressure. In normal writing, you'd call that a plot hole. In One Piece storytelling, that's foreshadowing for the planet's entire internal architecture. And then Oda drops Noah in your lap, a ship the size of a small country, parked right next to this impossible bubble, explicitly tied to Joy Boy's failed promise and a future day when the fishmen and merfolk will be moved en masse. Moved where? Up to the surface after the Red Line falls, out of the ocean entirely when the world gets, for lack of a better term, patched to its intended configuration? That's not a random prophecy, that is an evacuation plan baked into the setting. Listen to me. The moment you treat Fishman Island as planned infrastructure instead of a cute detour, the whole planet recategorizes itself. A stable, complex environment inside the red line implies the crust is not a simple solid shell. It's layered. It's segmented. It's designed. The same author who gave you Sky Islands balanced on sea clouds and a moon city full of dead automata is now showing you a mid-level between ocean and surface that only exists because someone wanted it there. Which brings us back to vertical anomalies. You've got Sky PA and the other Sky Islands above, Fishman Island and Noah below, and Enel's fairy Verth on the moon even higher than that. This is not a messy natural world. This is a multi-floor construct with races and civilizations distributed by altitude. Top floor, moon people and lost tech. Middle floors, clouds and gods. Ground floor, humans. Basement, modified humans waiting for a promised relocation. So if the red line has hollow pockets, the sky has built platforms, and the moon has murals of people arriving from somewhere else, are we sure we're even on the original planet in this story? Or are we living inside somebody's half-broken space installation, waiting for Joy Boy's patch notes to finally drop? So if we're stuck in somebody's half-broken space installation, I need you to stop thinking of the world government as generic anime fascists for a second. Tyrants are bad, sure, but tyrants usually want expansion, glory, monuments with their faces on them. These guys, they act more like overworked IT admins, desperately terrified that someone's going to unplug the wrong cable and brick the whole server. Here's the thing, censorship, Buster calls. The way they strangle travel routes with the calm belt and control over the red line, that's not just cruelty, that's risk management. You don't obliterate O'Hara because some nerds are reading history books. You obliterate O'Hara because those nerds are one PowerPoint away from explaining how the operating system of your entire world actually works. And if enough people understand the system, someone's going to try to hit factory reset. Every single week, notice the pattern. They don't panic over every rebellion. They panic over research. Geography, the Void Sentry, ancient weapons. Robin is not dangerous because she can punch a celestial dragon. She's dangerous because she can read the patch notes carved into the poneglyphs. Vegapunk isn't targeted because he built a big laser. He's targeted because he started connecting lost technology to a time when the world was more advanced than it is now. The category of threat that really scares them is people who might remember what this place used to be. And listen to me, that's weird if this is just Earth with funny islands, but it makes a sick amount of sense if the original 20 kings didn't build the prison, they inherited it. Imagine there's a pre-existing containment system, Redliner's wall, Grandliner's moat, Calm Belt as electric fence. The ancient kingdom either controlled it or rebelled against it. The 20 kings win, seize the console and go, okay, we're in charge now, and if we screw this up, something from outside gets in, or something from inside gets out. At that point, you're not just a monarch, you're the warden of a cosmic jail you barely understand. This does not excuse anything. This is not a sin to say out loud, but it reframes the paranoia. You Buster call islands because any structural damage to the world layout might destabilize the system. You erase centuries of history because the original user manual would get everyone asking the one question you cannot afford: what happens if we open the door? Pattern interrupt. What if Emu isn't sitting on a throne, but on a control chair? All those levers of power the community obsesses over, CP0, Seraphim, the Gorosei, stop being just tools of oppression and start reading as layered safety protocols. Redundancies, firewalls. They're not only guarding power, they're guarding the lock. And if they're the wardens, we need to ask the question that actually keeps them up at night. Who built this prison in the first place? And are the original architects still out there, waiting for someone to fail their watch? If the Gorosei are the wardens, then Emu is the thing the warden reports to when something goes so wrong the manual doesn't even have a page for it. We meet them as a silhouette, framed by candles, and that supposedly empty throne that was supposed to guarantee no one rules the world. And then Oda just quietly breaks the contract in front of you. Someone is on the empty throne, someone the five elders literally kneel to. Here's the thing. Structurally, Imu is not a king. A king is visible. A king is a symbol. Imu is an absence with authority attached. We see a shadowy figure strolling through a chamber of wanted posters, casually choosing which problems to erase. We see them in that strange garden-like room with the giant straw hat on ice, surrounded by flowers and butterflies, and then we cut to Lulusia getting deleted from the map as if someone hit format disk. That's not just tyranny, that's system administration. I need you to clock that aesthetic contrast. Flowers, butterflies, a serene garden, this curated natural beauty, paired with what is almost certainly ancient weapon-level destruction. The community keeps treating that room as spooky set dressing, but it reads way more intentional than that. Gardener imagery around a character whose main demonstrated power is pruning the planet. You maintain the garden. You remove diseased branches. You control which species are allowed to grow. So when we talk about Imu, we shouldn't just default to secret final boss tyrant. We need to consider a different category, curator of the planet itself. Vegapunk tells us the world used to have technology that surpasses the present. Enel's cover story shows automata on the moon, murals of winged people migrating to a blue planet. The term blue planet thrown around as if it were one entry on a cosmic map. Someone designed this place. Someone knew its true nature. Imu feels less like an upstart and more like a direct inheritor of those patch notes. And then there's Lulusia. That beam does not behave like random devil fruit blast. It's precise. It's vertical. It comes from the sky, past the clouds, with the Gorosei talking around it like they're authorizing an old protocol. Orbital or atmospheric weaponry is the cleanest read. The red line and grand line already look artificial. A containment grid wrapped around the globe. Lulusia is the moment Oda flashes you the admin console and then slams the laptop shut. So listen to me. If Imu has the keys to that, they're not just ruling this world. They're managing a larger system we haven't fully seen yet. A leftover representative of whoever turned this ocean ball into a lockbox. And that's where the foreshadowing gets terrifying, because toppling a tyrant is one story. Disabling a failsafe that a spacefaring civilization left behind is a completely different storytelling problem. You don't just win, you trigger whatever the system was built to prevent. Which raises the next question the series has been quietly daring you to ask. If Imu is the manager, who exactly are they managing the planet for? And what happens when someone finally fires them? So let's talk about what happens when the manager presses a button. Lucia is the first time Oda stops hinting and just shows you what space-level control looks like in practice. You get the shot of Imu in the empty throne room. You get the Gorosei talking about an incident that never existed. And then over this tiny, irrelevant kingdom, the sky starts to misbehave. Dark clouds swirl in a perfect circular pattern. Not a storm front, not a natural system, but a targeting reticle painted on the atmosphere. Then something hits, or fires, or both. We don't see a cannon, we don't see a ship, we just see beams of light stabbing down through the cloud ring, and then a full-page spread where the island is gone. Not ruined, not Marienford after the war. Erased, the map is redrawn, the newspaper rewrites reality. People talk about Lulusa, the way you talk about a typo you fix before you hit send. This is not a normal island destruction. This is a database delete. Here's the thing. That entire sequence reads way more as a sci-fi orbital strike than any seafaring superweapon. In classic sci-fi, when you get an orbital railgun or a satellite laser, the whole point is that the weapon never comes down to your level. It stays above the atmosphere, invisible, untouchable, and the only thing you ever see is the sky reacting and the ground ceasing to exist. Lulusia is basically the Death Star run by a micromanaging landlord, and Oda is being obnoxiously careful about it. The paneling keeps cutting from the clouds to terrified faces to the world map, but never once gives you a clean shot of the source. You know it's from above. You know it's not any ship you recognize, not any island, not some secret marine base on the horizon. The camera is pointed up, the effect is coming down, and the origin is just redacted. Now, in a vacuum, you could hand-wave this as ancient laser cannon, sure, whatever. This is fine, this is normal. Authors escalate. But we need to remember where we are in the story's foreshadowing ecosystem. Vegapunk has already told you the past civilization had tech surpassing his. Enel's cover story has already given you literal moon robots and derelict reactors. Bands have already spent a decade filing Uranus under probably some sky-based thing. So when IMU casually removes an island with a strike that screams, "I am in orbit and you are an ant," the Uranus theory stops being cute and starts being the default. The most reasonable category to put this in is, at least one ancient weapon is not a boat, not a mermaid, but a piece of surviving void century space infrastructure the world government still has the login for. And listen to me. If they can do that once, cleanly, on camera, what else have they edited out off panel? How many Lulucius never even made it into the history the poneglyphs are trying to salvage? I need you to really sit with the possibility that the current map of this world is just the version after several rounds of cosmic backspace, because the next step is asking whether the planet itself is the original document or just the latest draft, which is where Joy Boy walks in, grinning, with a giant cosmic eraser he absolutely did not get to use. We keep treating Joy Boy as this vague, sad legend, a tragic off-screen guy whose main character trait is wrote a really good apology letter. But listen to me, that apology to Fishman Island, that is not just, "Sorry I ghosted your ancestors." That reads like, "Sorry, the scheduled planetary patch update bricked the system and I couldn't reboot it." Think about what we actually know. Joy Boy promised the people of Fishman Island something so huge that it warranted building Noah, a ship the size of a small country, parked under the sea. He fails. He leaves a poneglyph apology. Poseidon is born into the royal line specifically to command sea kings and move that ark. That is not a normal broken promise category. That is infrastructure. That is logistics for mass migration. Oh, what was the plan? The text hands you the answer and dares you not to notice. Fishmen dream of the surface. Otohime fights to bring them there. Noah is explicitly tied to the Day of Promise. Shirahoshi is the living key to move the ship. Now put that over the map we just talked about. A world chopped into 4 oceans by a nonsense red line and a Stormwall Grand line. The cleanest read is that Joy Boy's promise was to move fishmen and merfolk into a different world configuration entirely, either after dismantling the red line or after hitting some kind of planetary reset that makes the seas sane again. Here's the thing. If the red line and grand line are a prison grid, the Noah is an evacuation vessel. Poseidon isn't just talks to big fish. She's route access to the planet's ocean system. Joy Boy's failure might literally be we tried to break the cage and something went catastrophically wrong. A Fishman Island ends up stuck under the very wall that was supposed to be erased. Now fast forward to Luffy. The community talks about him, inheriting Roger's will, the hat, the dream. This is fine. This is normal. But Oda keeps quietly upgrading the job description. Dumb God Nika, drums of liberation, the new Joy Boy. Vegapunk spelling out that the world used to be more advanced. Every time that beat hits, I need you to remember, Luffy isn't just the next pirate king. He's the guy inheriting a cosmic scale to-do list that Joy Boy couldn't finish. And what's on that list? Break the prison planet structure. Free the seas. Fulfill the promise to the people trapped below. Then, crucially, reconnect this edited globe with whatever off-world civilization Enel literally found on the moon. That's not just a revolution. That's a world reset from closed artificial aquarium to open system in a larger cosmic ocean. Joy Boy's failure and Luffy's potential success become the hinge between drafts. One closed, censored, walled-off planet. one reopened, resynced with the wider universe. The only question is, what happens to everyone living on the current version when someone finally hits restore original file? So when I say restore original file, your brain probably does the same thing mine did for years. You picture Laugh-Tale as a beach, a goofy palm tree, a cartoon skull rock, a big dumb chest with One Piece stamped on it in Comic Sans. We've all been running the same mental JPEG. Treasure Island, gold pile, roll credits. Listen to me. That image is Fanon. That's not foreshadowing. That's the community collectively hallucinating a Goonies ending because we grew up on pirate movies. This is not a sin. This is normal. But it blinds you to a way more intentional category of reveal Oda has been quietly setting up. Here's the thing. Nothing else about this world's endgame mysteries is small. Void Century? Planetary. Ancient weapons? Literally continent busting. Enel's moon trip? It's not a gag detour. It's an author screaming, hey, there were spacefaring winged people, automata, and a blue planet you're not on right now. Vegapunk confirms there was a prior civilization with tech on par with, or beyond, what Enel finds on the moon. So why would all of that culminate in a chest? Why would the final node of this whole planned storytelling lattice be something you could reproduce at a Disney ride? I need you to swap the JPEG. Stop thinking treasure cave. Start thinking planetarium control room. Laugh-Tale isn't the vault where the prize is stored. It's the observation deck where the true cosmos is finally turned back on. Ancient tech. Projection domes. Maybe a vantage point that lets you see the red line and grand line for what they are. A containment grid wrapped around an artificial world. Pattern interrupt. What if the One Piece is a button, or a key, or a login screen? Not metaphorically. A literal mechanism that lets you unshackle the planet from its current configuration and resync it with the wider universe Joy Boy failed to restore. Suddenly, Roger's laughter makes sense in a way oh wow, Gold never has. He and his crew reach the end of the greatest pirate race in history and discover they've been speedrunning a tutorial map. The seas, the routes, the Yonko turf wars, all the stuff they treated as the whole game, that was the aquarium. The punchline is realizing the glass walls were intentional, planned, and the exit has been hard-locked by a decision made 800 years ago. Of course he calls it One Piece, not because there's a neat pile of loot, but because the so-called world is literally one piece of a larger system. The cosmic joke is that the age of exploration never actually left the sandbox. And if Laugh-Tale is a planetarium, the treasure stops being wealth and becomes access knowledge of the Void Century, interface to the ancient weapons, a dashboard that turns the final war from topple the government into reboot the experiment, which means this isn't a race to the finish line anymore. It's a race to the control room. And the real question for the next section is, who actually gets to touch the controls? And what happens to everyone else when they do? Because here's the thing. Once you start talking about a control room, you're already admitting there's a bigger system. Control of what? Settings for what? A single ocean ball or a whole network of habitats? I need you to hold that question in your head while we talk about one of the most boring phrases in the series that secretly blows the door wide open. Blue Sea. And now, from Skypiea onward, Sky people consistently call the main world the Blue Sea and the Blue. To them, that endless ocean the rest of the cast treats as the world is just the water layer, a region, a category on a drop-down menu. When Konis or Pagaya talk about the Blue Sea, there's this casual, almost tourist brochure tone, as if they're describing down there from a stable vantage point up here. This is not a sin. This is normal in fantasy, but in One Piece it keeps going a step further, because then you get Enel, and Enel does not say Blue Sea. On the moon, in that cover story the community keeps treating as a gag reel, the murals literally depict winged people leaving the moon and heading to a blue planet. Not the world, not the only place that exists. A blue planet, Abra hearing, singular object, one marble in the box. You only talk that way if you already have a zoomed out map in your head. That phrasing implies a vantage point that is outside the ocean globe entirely. It's not the ocean that defines reality anymore. It's the color of this one sphere in a sky full of options. Enel's entire motivation is framed around fairy Verth, his dream of a limitless rich land above the clouds. Then he gets to the actual moon, finds ancient automata, advanced tech, and a carved history of people migrating from this place to that blue planet you've been watching for 1,000 chapters. Suddenly fairy Verth is not just a myth, it's a label in a multi-node system. And Skypier's obsession with verse slots perfectly into this. To Sky people, dirt is a scarce luxury. Real soil is sacred. They talk about Verth with the same reverence Wano has for opening borders. Now mirror that with the moon. An entire dead satellite with sealed up tech, energy resources, and a mural of three-winged tribes, Shandians, Skypians, Burkans, leaving one body for another. We need to stop pretending this is a random coincidence and not extremely intentional world building. Once you put Blue Sea, Blue Planet, and Fairy Earth in the same sentence, the story stops reading as we live on fantasy Earth with clouds and starts reading as we're on one node in a network of habitable worlds, moons, or even constructed habitats. The red line and grand line cross, that's a containment grid. The skylines and the moon, that's vertical real estate in a layered system. Vegapunk telling you ancient tech was more advanced, that's your author quietly pointing up. Listen to me. The text keeps nudging you to think in terms of multiple worlds, multiple layers, multiple Verths. The problem is we keep flattening it back into a single planet pirate map because we're pattern-seeking monkeys trained on Earth fantasy who see Jesus in toast and call it foreshadowing. This is fine. This is normal. But if the world is one node in a network, then the control room is not just about who rules the seas. It's about who gets access to the rest of the map and what happens to everyone stuck on the blue marble when that door finally opens. So if the control room is real, I need you to zoom the camera out one more time, because once you admit the moon has a city and fairy Earth carved into its crust, and the blue planet has sky islands stapled onto jet streams and a literal crosshair of oceans, you have to ask the annoying question, why would an author build all that for just one playground? Here's the thing, Oda has already shown you one off-world habitat in Enel's cover story, Ancient Automata. Murals of winged people abandoning the moon for a blue planet. The term blue planet thrown around as if the narrator is standing somewhere else, looking down. That's not cute flavor text. In foreshadowing terms, that's a loaded gun duct taped to the ceiling fan. If there was a moon city in fairy Verth, what else is out there that we haven't seen yet? Other dead moons with different tribes, orbital habitats rotting in the dark, full of Vegapunk tier tech that never made it planetside. Sister planets that the Blue Sea people only remember as distorted myths about gods falling from the sky. We need to stop reading those starry backgrounds as wallpaper and start treating them as set design. Vegapunk basically confirms the world used to run on a level of technology that matches the moon runes. This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is an author quietly telling you, this is normal for this universe. Your current Ocean Ball status is the downgrade. So when the story tosses around terms that only make sense from space, blue planet, true history, a sea called All Blue that sounds suspiciously like a global mixing event, that's your category shift. That's the narrative hint that this world is one node in a broken network. And from a storytelling perspective, revealing that late is extremely intentional. If you start One Piece as a space opera, nobody cares about Orange Town. But if you spend 1,000 chapters convincing fans the stakes are save this world, and then you finally show that the red line and grand line are containment seams on a larger machine, the stakes jump to reconnect a fractured cosmos. The final war stops being a regional revolution and becomes a software patch for an entire system. Which brings us to the title itself. One Piece. The fandom default is big treasure chest, maybe a weapon, maybe a history book. This is fine, this is normal. But the more you stare at Enel star maps, at planetary diagrams hidden in background gags, at the way poneglyphs feel less like tombstones and more like data packets, the more One Piece starts reading as one shard of a larger whole, literally one piece of a shattered world order, and metaphorically one surviving culture in a galaxy of amputated siblings. So listen to me, if the blue marble is only one piece, then the real punchline of the final saga might not be, "We reached the moon." It might be Oda cracking the sky open just far enough to show you that the moon was never the ceiling in the first place, and that something out there has been waiting for the moment this planet remembers it isn't alone. And I can already hear the comment section revving up. Okay, space guy, calm down, you're just seeing galaxies in your breakfast cereal. And to be fair, the One Piece community absolutely does this. We are pattern-seeking monkeys. We stare at 2 panels of Zoro napping, and suddenly this is foreshadowing for when he cuts the concept of sleep in the final war. This is normal, this is fine. Anime fandoms run on wild theories, power-scaling charts, and screenshots that allegedly prove Sanji is secretly a Lunarian mink seraphim hybrid. Here's the thing, there is an actual name for this brain gremlin, pareidolia. Seeing faces in clouds, seeing Jesus in toast, seeing a hidden moon on every circular object Oda draws. You stare long enough, your neurons start connecting dots that were never meant to be in the same picture. Then you stack confirmation bias on top of that. Once you decide Oda is doing a space twist, suddenly every round rock, every starry sky, every telescope is evidence. And this is not a sin. This is not bad reading. This is just what happens when passionate fans meet dense storytelling and have too much free time. The problem is when you can't tell the difference between my headcanon constellation and the author actually planned this. So I need you to zoom out and look at what we've been doing in this theory. We're not circling one suspicious panel and screaming, "Moon confirmed." We keep tripping over the same categories of weirdness. Geography that behaves more like a containment grid than a planet. Mythology that keeps pointing up instead of down. Technology that belongs to a dead space-age civilization. Terminology that treats this ocean as one blue marble among others. General claim. The world feels constructed. Specific example. The red line and grand line form a perfect cross that wraps the globe, with calm belts as static borders. That is not how tectonics work. That is how you draw a prison diagram. Then you add Sky Island stacked vertically, Enel calling the surface Blue Sea, Vegapunk saying past tech was more advanced than anything now, and a literal moon cover story showing winged people migrating from fairy Earth to a blue planet. At some point, we need to ask, are we seeing Jesus in toast, or are we staring at a mural? When geography, mythology, technology, and terminology all lean in the same direction, the odds that this is random noise drop fast. The foreshadowing in the classical sense is about intentional early setup. Pre-writing is about decisions locked in before chapter 1. Both leave fingerprints across different parts of the story. Listen to me. If you're skeptical, good. Push back. Tell me which link in this chain you think snaps first. But if your explanation for the entire pattern is Oda is just sloppy and inconsistent, you're not arguing against space theory, you're arguing against the documented way this author plans and documents his endgame. And that, historically, has not gone well for the doubters. Because the next step is to stop talking in abstractions and walk through those fingerprints one category at a time. And here's where we need to slam on the brakes for a second, because there's a different kind of denial going on in the community. Not the Oda is sloppy crowd. The Oda made a quirky Earth crowd. The people who see a new island and immediately sprint to Photoshop to pin it on a real-world map. Dressrosa is Spain. Wano is Japan. This sea must be the Pacific. You've seen those posts. You've probably shared a few. This is not a sin. This is fine. This is normal. Pattern-seeking monkey brain wants to see Google Maps in the Grand Line. But listen to me. When you treat every island as a tourism brochure reference, the highest compliment you're giving Oda is, wow, he made a really weird Earth fanfic. That is such a brutal downgrade for what this author is actually doing. Because here's the thing, the red line and grand line form a perfect planetary cross, the calm belt is a built-in moat, and fans go, haha, anime geography, moving on. You take deliberate cosmic nonsense and you shove it into the lol anime physics category, instead of asking, why would someone design a prison planet grid? You flatten intentional planetary engineering into a meme backdrop. And it doesn't stop at geography. Enel flies to the moon, finds ancient automata, murals of winged people leaving the moon for a blue planet, and advanced tech Vegapunk later confirms used to exist. The story literally shows you a spacefaring civilization and calls the rich land up there. The response? Oh cool, Skypiea is just Brazil in the sky but the moon. No, that's you forcing Earth logic onto a setting that is screaming multi-world every single week. I need you to remember Oda's stated goal. He wants to create the greatest adventure story ever, not the greatest geography quiz. When you insist this has to be fantasy Earth with funny hats, you are arguing that the guy who pre-planned Void Century lore, Will of D, ancient weapons and Nika somehow stopped dreaming the moment he drew a globe. You're saying the ambition ceiling is clever travel brochure. That's the problem. Because once you accept the possibility that this is not Earth at all, that the blue planet terminology is literal, that poneglyphs and Joy Boy and Laugh Tale might be the operating manual for reconnecting multiple worlds, suddenly the foreshadowing stops being cute Easter eggs and starts being evidence of a cosmic scale outline he's been quietly executing for decades. Pattern interrupt. What if the safest, most comforting assumption you have about One Piece, the it's just fantasy Earth assumption, is the thing actually blocking you from seeing the story Oda is writing? What happens if you drop that safety blanket and reread the series as an intentional multi-world saga that only looks small because you keep shrinking it to fit a globe you already know? Hold that thought, because now we can finally walk through the fingerprints with that bigger frame in mind. So let's test drive this not Earth lens on arcs you already know by heart, because I need you to see how fast the floor drops out once you stop treating the map as a given and start treating it as evidence. Skypiea first. The community loves to file it under fun detour, cool drums, Enel goes to the moon. Moving on. Here's the thing, if this planet is engineered, Skypiea is not a detour. It's your tutorial level. Vertical world building stops being a quirky gag and turns into the first explicit contact with off-world descendants. Winged races, dials that feel more sci-fi than fantasy, a literal fairy Verth myth pointing upward, and then Enel's cover story quietly shows you murals of those same wings leaving the moon for a blue planet. That's not random flavor. That's the author waving a giant neon sign that says, "This sky is not empty, and this sea is not the only world." Now take Eni's lobby in Marineford. On the surface, they're government arcs. Buster calls, judicial islands, admirals being terrifying. But if the red line and grand line are a containment grid, those arcs read as prison riots against the wardens of a planetary system. The problem isn't just that the world government is corrupt. The problem is that it's structurally incapable of allowing void century intel, ancient weapons, or outer world knowledge to leak, because that knowledge doesn't just topple a regime, it invalidates the entire cage. You're not just watching Spandam be incompetent and Akainu be a war criminal. You're watching the guardians of a cosmic NDA scramble to keep the inmates from realizing there's an outside. Fishman Island? Under the Earth reading, it's an underwater racism arc. Under the prison planet reading, it's a population literally shoved beneath the constructed world, trapped under the red line's foundation. Their dream of reaching the sun and the surface isn't just metaphorical dignity, it's a foreshadowing of physically reconfiguring the planet's architecture. If Luffy is the man who will destroy Fishman Island, that might not be a tragedy. It might be the cost of tearing down the load-bearing wall of the cage so the people at the bottom stop drowning in everyone else's structural sins. This is not a sin. This is normal for an author who has already planned the end game. Dressrosa and Wano then become case studies in nested isolation. Tiny worlds inside the bigger locked box. Dressrosa is sealed by narrative control and a puppet king. Wano is sealed by literal walls and a closed border policy. Under a space theory lens, those aren't just quirky national traits. They're mini prisons, test cases for how the global system works. Cut the population off, rewrite history, weaponize geography, then dare anyone to break in or out. When Luffy tears those walls down, he's not just freeing countries, he's rehearsing for breaking the planet's shell. And crucially, listen to me, none of this erases the emotional core. It doesn't replace Nami's pain, Robin's I want to live, Otoime's dream, or Kinemon's grief. It stacks a second layer of cosmic injustice underneath them. The tears still work if this is fantasy Earth. They just hit harder if every goodbye, every promise, every "I'll take you to the sea" is secretly pointing toward an even bigger liberation. Not just freedom on the world, but freedom from the world, which we need to keep in mind, because the next step is asking what Laugh Tale and the One Piece actually are, if the final destination isn't a continent, but an exit hatch.